You have a motion to and a second to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those approved, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstained? Motion carries. We're looking to approve the minutes of the October 4th, 2021 meeting.
I'll second it.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor to approve the minutes of the October 4th, 2021 meeting. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Okay, Tracy's here to give us an update.
Yes, I have 3 quick updates for you. Just wanted to affirm in the context of a committee meeting that the town of Addison voted for a second time against withdrawal from the unified union. I'm sure you have all been up to speed on that. I also wanted to highlight for you that the values, goals, and criteria summary was updated one more time based on your discussions at the last meeting, and that is reflected in the most recent version of the document that is linked in the agenda, and remind you that we'll discuss processes for taking that kind of thinking to the community later this evening. And lastly, there are just a couple of tiny updates on the work plan. One is that in December, I added a reminder for us to think about the February and March meeting dates. And also, at your first meeting in December, we are hoping to have a report for you on a transportation study that was recently completed, which looks at what we can expect in the future in terms of transportation and how that might play out in different operating structures. So that would be important information that we're shooting for December 6th for. And that is what I have for updates for you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Doesn't appear to be. Okay, we're going to move on to the tax rate modeling. Tracy, I believe, is going to introduce our business manager.
Just wanted to give a brief update before your business managers share their excellent work with you. Before they share tax rate models, I want to emphasize that they are models, which means that they are projections that are based on expert opinion and expert information and the trends of the past to predict what might happen in the future. I can almost guarantee you that the projections you see tonight won't be exactly accurate. It's a lot like thinking about installing solar panels in your home and trying to figure out the payoff rate for that investment in your home. And you can make some projections about what the timeline for that might be, but the amount of electricity you use in the future, what happens in terms of electricity rates, all of those variables come into play in real life and affect the real payoff rate that you experience when you make an investment like that. And so the same is very much true for looking at tax rate projections into the future. You can think a lot about the assumptions that we bring to the tax rate models, and we can play with those a little bit to show you different scenarios potentially. But what's most important is that you look for patterns and trends as you think about what might happen in the future, as we think about comparing the status quo versus a union a union district option, and look for those patterns and trends going forward, and use that as a guide for decision making as we consider what we might ultimately recommend. So with that, I will turn it over to Elizabeth. Is Floyd here too? Hi, Elizabeth.
She's behind you.
Oh, there he is.
We thought it important that somebody be here to face slings and arrows if needed.
Would you like to come to the table?
No, I'm good right here. I mean, if needed, I'm not on.
Okay.
So is everybody there able, I can't see what you guys can see. So is everybody there able to actually see the document that I sent you, Tracy, earlier today?
I am not in and not positioned to project it, but I could, if that's what you'd like me to do, or you could project.
Can they see me?
They
Can
can-
everybody there see me? Okay, so I think I have it up on my screen. Would it be easier if you just made it so I could share my screen?
Can you not share screen? You should be able to share screen on the bottom panel. That's not one of your options.
Oh, yep, it says I can. Never mind. I thought she.
Hi, everybody. It's Sheila.
Okay. How about that? Can we see now?
Yes.
Okay. It's going to be a little tricky for me because I have to move all these little faces around so that I can actually see my whole screen and not see all the little people that are on the Zoom. All right. So for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Elizabeth Jennings. I am the Director of Finance and Operations for Addison Northwest. And I've been working with Floyd. We met together on Friday and we've talked together a lot, trying to put this together for you guys. The first tab in my presentation is the disclaimer. I feel like Tracy kind of already said this, so I was going to read it to you, but I don't really feel like that's necessary at this point. She kind of went over the idea that this is a model that we're looking for trends. So I don't feel like we really need to, read through this individually. This, I will tell you though, where we got this disclaimer from. We actually asked other business managers from all the other business manager group and asked them for samples of what they did if they merged previously in any way, shape, or form, what templates they used, what model they used, and any disclaimers or any documents that they might have used in that process previously. Of course, many of those are just a merger of an SU to an SD, so a supervisory union to a school district, meaning just within their own district merging, as we both have done in our districts. And this was a disclaimer that they had vetted through their lawyers and through their consultant during those mergers, and they felt that it was a really good idea to put this on any of these kind of studies. So we went ahead and did the same. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
So the next tab we have here, this is it's a budget tax calculation worksheet. So the worksheet walks us through the calculation of the union district tax rates. It's the FY22 columns. We have both of our districts separate. So we have Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham. Those are the actual approved budgets for the two districts. And at the bottom of the calculation is the actual resulting tax effects of those two budgets. So when you see the negative amount under equals estimated tax rate increase or decrease, those are the actual amounts we decreased our tax rates in that FY22 budget year. The highlighted green column is where we merge the two, and that's fiscal year 23. So that's a projection. It's not an actual approved budget. It's from both districts combined, and it used projections that both of our districts already had in place. So we already had these projections and we just combined them. And then we reduced them by what we believed would be the savings in a merger. Those savings are also something that was already published and out there. They were presented in both districts at different meetings and different times. The approximate savings is $3.6 million, and that's up here in the top figure. It's being taken out of that figure after we put in our budget projections. Then you have local revenue. It does not include the on behalf tech center. That's part of the calculation that has to go into your education funding. We did not assume any application of surplus. You'll see here in past years, we did have surplus dollars. Both districts did that they applied. It's not to say that we won't have surplus dollars to apply, but we don't want to assume that when we do a budget projection. And then it moves to calculating what your education funding would be. And then you have your equalized pupil estimates. There again, those are estimates. Floyd and I used the same methodology using ADM reports and templates and NASDAQ enrollment and our own enrollment figures to try to cipher out what we thought our equalized pupils would be in these years. And that gives us a projected threshold for our equalized pupils is estimated. We have the equalized spending per pupil. It shows how much we would be above or below the threshold that the state sets. This is the estimated exclusions for excess spending. So most of that dollar figure that is being deducted there is actually debt service, and it's mostly Addison Northwest. We have more debt than Mount Abraham does, so we receive more credits for that debt. So then you have what is the actual taxable equalized pupil that they use in the taxable calculation. We forecasted the homestead yield. And then we come up with what the union tax rate would be in the calculation. In this column for FY23, you'll see that we did not try to say anything about what the prior year estimate union tax rate was and compare it because before we were not merged and now we are. As we move into the other years for fiscal year 24, 25, 26, 27, out to the right, you can see that we did compare it to the previous year tax rate, and the tax rate increases are not only not favorable, they're pretty substantial. So we'll get back to that a little more as we walk through. It's not all bad news in this financial outlook, but I do want to point out that it definitely is still showing increases in the tax rates that are substantial. There is a lot of information that hasn't been given to us by the state yet, obviously, even for the current year. So that is our actual equalized pupil, the threshold, the property yield. So not only are we estimating out in the future, we really don't know what those numbers will be for FY23 even. We can see that in the first year of the district merger, our tax rate is declined. It's smaller, it's lower. It's lower by about 5.45 cents from Addison Northwest in 22, and it's lower by less than 1 cent for Mount Abraham. It's 0.75 of a cent. Now, one might think if you look at just that alone, that ANWSD benefits more from the merger than Mount Abraham does. That's not really the case. We have to keep in mind that these numbers over here to the left are an FY22 actual budget, and all kinds of things change when you project into FY23. We don't have an approved budget for FY23. One of the things that changes pretty substantially is in your equalized pupil numbers here. You can see that Addison Northwest drops by about 15.5 pupils, and Mount Abraham drops by 33.83. So Mount Abraham starts out with a higher number of pupils, your bigger school district, but you also decline by larger numbers throughout the projection. And so what that means is your drop in revenue is going to be more steep than Addison Northwest is. The other thing that's helpful about Addison Northwest is that we have those debt credits. So we are also helping both districts stay below the threshold of per pupil spending longer. So that's also a positive thing. Let's see. I think that's it for this sheet. So I'm going to move on. Does anyone have any questions about this particular worksheet, or would you like to wait until I'm done and then ask questions?
Before you leave the sheet, it's hard to see the screen, the numbers on the screen from the distance that we are.
Okay.
Could you just talk through the modeled tax rate increases and what you project in the union school district structure?
Okay, so in the merged district for FY23, the tax rate, the union tax rate comes out to be 1.6199. That's the union tax rate for the merged district. And as I indicated, it's 5.45 cents lower than Addison Northwest FY22 and less than a penny less than Mount Abraham's FY22. As we move into FY24, your tax rate goes up by approximately almost 9 cents. It's 8.68 cents. It goes up to 1.7066. In FY25, the number rises again by 16 cents to 1.8698. In FY26, it rises to 2.1068. That's almost a 24-cent increase. And it rises again another 23 cents in FY27 to 2.3411. So those are sizable, as I was indicating. But as we walk through the rest of the presentation, I think you're going to see, as compared to the projections of each district alone through these same years, that at least for 23 through 26, the unified union district merger is actually more beneficial in your tax rate than us being separate. So it's interesting to see how large these are. What that tells me is there's still work to be done, even if you merge. Is that good, or is there anything else that needs more explanation on this particular sheet before I go on?
Okay, yep. We have a couple questions.
Okay.
We can start with you.
Hi, I'm trying to understand some of the assumptions. I heard that declining enrollment was factored out in the outgoing years. Was there anything else adjusted or assumed to change in the outgoing years? Or is the static budget just escalated through those outgoing years?
So that's a good question. So first, I want to say that the equalized pupils and the enrollment drop is not excluded from this. What is excluded is the weighting study changes. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but so we did use our enrollment figures to show the declining enrollment estimation in our equalized pupil numbers in this model. We just did not adjust that by any possible weighting study change that might come from legislation. Other things that are estimated, so within these budget projections, we actually mapped out from a FY22 budget, and then we calculate how much we believe things like health insurance, salary increases, the cost of living, and apply that to all the expenditures in their different areas and come up with an actual budget projection. So both districts have done that in these models as we map out through the year. So it is not just a static, it's not just a static number necessarily as you go out through the expenditures. And likewise, with revenues, you'll see that it fluctuates a little bit. So it's not just a static number, it's actually using our projections that we use for our own budgeting purposes. We've actually presented this to our own boards with in our retreats. The things that we had to estimate that are completely out of our control are things like this threshold for the equalized pupil spending. And literally, I'll tell you, in this model, for the threshold and the yield, all we did was increase it by 0.5%. Typically, it tends to go up every year, but you never know how much it's going to go up. And sometimes it goes up pretty sizable. And last year, the threshold went up like $30, which was not super helpful for any of the districts in their, their tax rate calculation. So we did try to project the different variables, just like we would when we're projecting in our own individual districts. Does that answer any of your question?
I guess maybe I should say it more directly, since staff resources, human resources is such a large percentage of the budget. Is the same number of staff in 23 the same number of staff that's in where you go out to 27?
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. So we declined. So like we said, we did account for staff reductions in 23 because of the merger. There are a number of staff reductions there, but you are absolutely correct. We did not account for additional reductions in staff as we move out through 24 to 27. That's true.
So same staff with a best guess factor increasing that. Which
Right,
is what,
for benefits and salary.
Which is what drives the bulk of all of our budget, both of our budgets.
Right, but there is something to be said for what he's asking about too, is that in declining enrollment, there may be opportunities along the way as you move through those years. Either, certain staff members leave, you use natural attrition, or you decline your staffing commensurate with your, with your ability based on the needs with your declining enrollment. But I also realize that sometimes it's not cut and dry that you lose a certain number of students and you can automatically cut staff, because sometimes if you still have to provide a program or a class, it doesn't really matter if there's 15 kids in that class or if there's 11. So, you still have to have the class if you don't want to lose the program. So there's some of that, but I do acknowledge that was not projected. The decline of possible additional staff members as you move from 24 to 27 was not factored in here. And I'm not really sure how we would do that necessarily without really looking at every single class and every single program.
Right here.
Well, I guess I kind of had two things. One of them was the debt credits. I'm wondering if you could just explain what those are. I just know in my own personal finances, I generally avoid debt at all costs. So what exactly are debt credits? And also, if how much debt, I can't really see the spreadsheet that well from where I'm sitting. How much debt is each district carrying into this merger?
Okay, so there are two different kinds of credits that go into this, the line that says estimated exclusions for excess spending. And there's this little negative number carrying all the way across every single part. There's two different exclusions that the state allows us to exclude from our calculation to stop us from going over the threshold penalty for equalized pupils. One of them is actually excess spending on special education students that are extraordinary cost students. We get a little tiny credit for that. And I think your district maybe gets a certain amount of that too. That's probably where your say under Mount Abraham, under FY22, Mount Abraham has credits of $207. I'm guessing that most of that is probably from excess spending, high cost students. Ours, we get some of that, but we also get approximately $1,000 or a little less than that each year. It has grown in FY23 because we actually took on a new loan. So we get a credit for the amount of bond debt that we actually hold. They consider that not part of the normal education. So they don't charge it against our tax rate calculation as far as a penalty goes. You can't really deduct it from the whole calculation, but where it helps you is if you see that, for instance, in FY25, when we're merged, we have a situation where we are over the spending threshold per pupil by $1,847. Together with our excess spending credits and those debt credits from Addison Northwest, we have $1,286 that they're going to give us in credits so that we aren't going as far over the threshold. That means we're only going to get penalized in the tax rate calculation for the difference between those two numbers. And that's what it does for you. It's just reducing the penalty that you get for being over the threshold. And it's all part of the state calculation. And we estimate what that number is going to be, but the state does officially give us that number after we publish our budgets and give them to them. They calculate the number for us. So we don't necessarily even know what that number is going to be. We are estimating that as well.
And I guess the second thing I was wondering about is just in the yearly projections as we project out, would it be possible to look at like a staff to student ratio, like an average over like a 5-year span, and project out using that?
I think you could project a staff to student ratio. I think you'd want to set some criteria as far as, are you talking about all staff to all students, or are you excluding, say, custodial or food service, or are you thinking about, ratios of staff that works directly with the students versus the number of students. So it would depend. I think you'd have to set some criteria for us. I think there would be a way to at least put out what we have for current staff to student ratios. I'm not really certain how you would project them unless you literally walked through class by class and determined, okay, now how big would this classroom be? And would we be able to reduce a staff member? That's kind of what I was getting at with why we didn't reduce the staffing as we moved from 24 to 27, is because we would literally have to go class by class and figure out how many students were going to be in what classes at what time, and would that necessitate a reduction in staff. And I think only if you did that would you be able to come up with a projected number of staff that would really still be there in, say, FY27. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. I was just thinking, I just know that the staffing is such a huge part of the budget.
It might be helpful. It might be helpful to just see what the staffing, ratios are maybe now, in the current fiscal year. That might be helpful. Maybe if that's useful information, we probably could come up with that.
Erica had her hand up first.
My question's basically been answered, but I was just wanting some clarification on the threshold means if we go above that amount of spending per pupil, then we get a higher tax rate. Okay.
Yes. So if we go above the threshold, what they do is they take the amount that we are over the threshold and they almost double count that difference in your tax rate calculation. That's what the state calculation does. So if you're $100 over the threshold, even after your debt credits are applied, you're going to get charged for that $100 twice in your tax rate calculation.
Are those penalties included in this budget?
Yes. Yep. It's in the calculation.
Presumably the savings and expenditures are staff. I think you already alluded to that. Is that all in central office staff?
It is not. So it's central office staff is a substantial portion of it. There is also the switch over of having one school be a 6 through 8 middle school and the other school be a 9 through 12 high school. So that would be the Virgins High School now and the Mount Abraham Union High School now would change to those different models in this projection. So there is staffing cuts in that, in making that switch over. as both of us now have 7 through 12 in our schools. And we actually got that number from having the principal out in our school district meet with the principal in your school district and go over the staffing and what kind of, reductions might be able to happen based on that switch.
As I recall, it was about a 2/3 staffing savings and a 1/3 admin. It was like 1.1 was the central office savings and the rest was teachers. Is that right, Patrick? I think that was approximately what we determined.
Yes, it was about 2.5 million in staffing savings at the middle high school level, and that's without reducing programming. I think that's a key component to this. That's maintaining, or in some cases, growing programming a little bit while saving those staffing expenses, and about $1 million in the central office reductions.
And just in December, at the first meeting in December, we're hoping to have principals with you to talk about opportunities and challenges in the various structures. So the story behind those possibilities is coming in the future.
If I could just follow up on that. So there are some facilities use differences between the budgets and the savings derived thereof. Does that include Lincoln Elementary School or not?
We did not change any configuration of any elementary schools in this model. So this includes all of the current elementary schools that you have and that we have.
Thank you.
Yes.
Quick question, if the, how are projections affected if the threshold remains suspended or abandoned?
If they remain suspended, meaning they don't rise or fall, then this model would change a little bit. It actually probably would get a little bit worse because, as you can see, I put the threshold as growing over time. If they abandon the threshold overall, the only difference for our districts would be that we would no longer receive that penalty. So your tax rates would, reduce a little bit as you go out here where you see that the threshold's being breached. Your tax rates would be a little bit lower because you wouldn't get that penalty. So the calculation would be pretty much the same. It's just that they wouldn't be penalizing you for that overage. Is there anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one. So this next tab is all the same information, really. It starts with the same budgets. It moves from our 22 budgets to our merger, and it goes out through. But we thought this was helpful because it does give a little bit of additional information as we move down through, and we can see where we're calculating what year do we actually start running into trouble with our being over the threshold, and it makes it really clear here. So it's FY25 where we see $1.2 million. And over here, if you can't read it, it says the change needed to be under the threshold after using your credits. And so that's basically saying that in order to be under the threshold in that year, we would need to find almost $1.3 million in our collective budgets to try to reduce spending in order to be below that threshold, or generate more revenue, right? Like if there was a way to do such a thing. And how many students, how many pupils, the weighted pupils, how many would it take to be under that threshold? And in this FY23 column, it shows we'd need 67.02. That's pretty substantial. It's not likely that you're going to have that many families move in that amount of time. The other thing this worksheet shows, and it gets worse as you go out over fiscal year 26 and 27, you can see it gets a lot worse as far as the dollar figure and the number of pupils to stay under that threshold. There again, if the threshold is no longer a scenario, it still means your tax rate would be going up. The only thing that threshold does is set whether or not you get a penalty. But it's a lot of times the marker that people use to try to stay below so that the tax rates don't increase too much. So the other thing this worksheet does is way at the bottom, it calculates how much does that tax rate that we're projecting influence what the education side of the taxes would be on, say, a $300,000 home. And so as you walk through that, you can see in FY23 merged, it goes from $4,860. In FY24, it goes to $5,120. FY25 is $5,610. FY26 is $6,320, and FY27 is $7,023. So it just shows that tax rate effect on a $300,000 home. Now, what I really wanted to show was this last tab, because I think this is important after hearing all this information about the tax rate still growing, being over the threshold, merger versus separate. And so what I did here is I pulled together what is the two key factors here, whether you're over or under the threshold and the union tax rate increases. And so this top chart shows the over under threshold, and it's Addison Northwest is the blue. MAUSD on my screen is kind of like a mauve color. It may be more of an orangish color on your screen, because when I did this at work, it actually was orange. So I don't know why my color changed. And then the merged district is kind of a yellowish color. It's the lighter color. And you can see that the merged district still inclines over time, but it starts out lower and it ends up still being lower. So the story about the threshold is in a merger, it's not great as you move out here through FY25 to 27, meaning there's still work to be done in trying to find more cost efficiencies in your budgets, but it's actually still better than if we are separate. The projections that we have being separate are worse than the scenario with us merged, and for both of us. And then the lower section here is the union tax rate comparison. So again, Addison Northwest is blue, MAUSD is kind of a pinkish orange, and the merged is a lighter yellowish color. Now this one's a little bit different. You can see that the merger does bring us lower in the beginning. It keeps us lower for quite a while, and then it breaches the Mount Abraham line and almost comes and touches the Addison Northwest projection line if we weren't merged. So somewhere in this 26, 27 timeframe, clearly there's a sizable issue that you've got to start dealing with early on in your budgeting and trying to find more efficiencies, even if you're in a merged district. There's, basically work to be done in building your budgets. This scenario and merging doesn't solve the declining enrollment problem, basically, is what I'm saying. It slows down the growth of it for both of our districts, gives us more time, but it doesn't solve it. And the only solution to something like that is if they change the whole model, the actual whole calculation model and how we receive our funding. Otherwise, we have to find ways to save money without cutting programs and still, just run more efficiently. And I think we've both done that in the last how many ever years as we've moved through our budgets. Each district does it on their own. So this would just mean us doing it together and having a little more, power behind us as far as our numbers. Does anyone have any questions about either the one I just shared or this? Or Floyd, do you have something to add? How about Floyd?
I think you're hitting all the right buttons. It reflects trend. It reflects what we've already known. I think it recognizes that there's more to do. Back to the MAUSD proposal that we've been kicking around with how to better utilize our facilities based on the number of students we have, all of those will still need to come into play. It also assumes the rate of growth reflective of not changing any staff or other items that we might be able to generate efficiency for. It doesn't show the unknowns. You know, we could say we know we can remove this cost, and we know this cost is going to stay, but in any merger structure, it's the year 2 and 3 where you find the other efficiencies that aren't apparent on these spreadsheets. And the expectation would be that efficiencies will be found, not additional costs.
I think I would agree with that. And I also, that makes me think of something else that I just want to add to this. When we put the savings in for staffing based on the merger, we put the entire savings right at the very beginning in the first year of merger, FY23. And I just want to point out that that might not be 100% reality because I've been in an SU before that merged to a SD, and you don't flip a switch on June 30th and become a school district consolidated one entity from 5 to 1, or in this case 2 to 1 overnight and have it all be done on July 1st. So I'm just thinking that as far as paperwork and filing as your entity, getting all your ducks in a row and finding those efficiencies might take you a year or two of kind of dwindling that down and really finding where those efficiencies are. I think you will see more efficiencies as you move out through those other years that we could not project. But there again, I do believe that in fiscal year 23 and 24 is when you'd really have to see that first initial decrease. I think it would be a little more gradual. It might be a year or two and not immediate savings.
So correct me if I'm wrong, did you say you put in 0.5% increase for the threshold for each year? Is there a basis for why that would be such a small increase?
Because the average of what that number has increased in the past is that low. Some years it's, the increase has been as much as $200. And then in other years, like last year, it was $30. So a 0.5% actually equaled about $95 a year is what it increased. So that was the average that we've seen over the last 5 years in that threshold number.
It seems to me that if we're only increasing the threshold by, maybe half or a quarter of what we're increasing salaries by, then every district in the whole state is, the slopes don't line up. Every district is going to cross that threshold. So is that legislatively outlined? Like, what would have to happen to have the threshold rise more?
The threshold numbers, which is a New England generated inflationary factor. So we have no control. The legislature, it's statute that says this is the number we use, which is why, to Elizabeth's point, the 0.18 increase last year was staggering in terms of widening that gap. I think it's well-intentioned and best practice to not assume that the threshold is going to grow at a rate that doesn't require us to tighten our spending. That's the intent of it. So using that 0.5, if it goes up 0.7, a little more wiggle room. But we'll know as it comes along that we have that as we're building budgets. Again, it's important not to think of those individual numbers like that, but to really look at the trend, the gap, and the structure. It's consistent with every projection that we've done with individual districts, and now as a merged district, we see the same trend.
And I will say, it doesn't make sense. Like, I totally agree with you that, 0.5% on a threshold increase doesn't make sense to us either, especially when, the CPI increase average is about 2.7%. Salaries tend to go anywhere from 2% to 3%. Health insurance is going up anywhere from 9% to 15%. So it doesn't make sense. And that's exactly part of the problem that we have in getting budgets without having to cut programs.
Okay.
So I might say that the way the high spending threshold is calculated has changed several times since it was first instituted. And the legislature responds to pressure. So to the extent that individuals, school districts, school board members talk to their legislative representatives, the threshold calculation can change yet again.
And the other factor that does play a role is also that homestead yield, the property yield. And that did fluctuate quite a bit this year, but over time, that has a tendency to only rise by a certain amount also. So that goes into that same calculation, and that's directly related to your tax rate, because it's taking that equalized pupil spending and dividing it by that property yield, and that's what's generating your tax rate. And that's also driven by legislature and their decision, and how they calculate that has changed over time also.
One item that's not in here, and purposefully not in here, is a CLA calculation for individual towns. And it's, well, that'd be a big chase to try and get all of that information this early in this process.
What is CLA?
Sorry, the common level of appraisal. It's an attempt to equalize the dollars tax rate across communities with fluctuating values.
Right, based on the property values of the appraisals in those towns. And so in some cases, if your union tax rate, no matter what your union tax rate is that we put out, which is what we're trying to project, some towns will see a higher increase in taxes, and some towns will see a lower, and some towns will be right at that border and be right close to the union tax rate based on their own common level of appraisal in their town.
Any questions for Elizabeth? Or
Direct them all to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Floyd.
We all know you're the smarter one in the room.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Especially the graph, the line graph is very helpful.
And Floyd.
I'll link a PDF of each of the slides with Lori's help to the minutes, so it will be available to you all shortly.
Okay, next up, we're going to discuss the weighting study, and we've invited Senator Ruth Hardy here this evening to give us a bit of an overview. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me to your meeting, and how convenient that I'm here for you to put pressure on. Thank you, Mr. Sharp. And Floyd and Elizabeth, thank you for that presentation. That was really excellent. It was really helpful for me to hear where you're at.
So I'm Ruth Hardy. I'm one of the 2 state senators for the Addison district, which includes all of Addison County plus Huntington and Buell Score. And I live in East Middlebury, so thank you for having me up here tonight. I am also a former school board member. I served 3 terms on the Middlebury area school boards. I chaired the Middlebury Elementary School Board, and I co-chaired our Act 46 Merger Study Committee. So I've been in these seats before. I know what you're going through, and I just commend you for taking this on, even though you didn't have to, and really looking at what the options are for your districts. That's really great, and especially to be doing it during a pandemic and multiple other crises at the same time. So thank you for your work and all of the attention that you're paying to this. I was invited here to talk to you about the pupil weighting study, which has been mentioned a few times. It obviously would have a big impact on you, or could potentially. So I want to talk to you about where we're at. I am the co-chair of the task force that has been assigned as a sort of off-session study committee to look at how we might implement the recommendations of the pupil weighting study. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background and then tell you where we're at, and what the next steps are, and then answer any questions you might have. And I'm happy to come back or meet with any of you, or however you want to do it. I'm here for you to bounce questions off of or ideas off of. So in 2018, I believe, it was prior to me being in the legislature, so it was when Representative Sharp was in the legislature, so for that, you can direct your to him. The legislature commissioned a study about our school finance funding formula to specifically figure out if the weights for pupils, for different types of pupils, in the calculation of the equalized pupil count, which, as Elizabeth has just explained, is what is used to determine a school district's tax rates, whether those weights were accurate. And our current system, we have several weights, one for students in poverty, and they get weighted an additional 0.25. So if you have the sort of average elementary school student who's not a student in poverty, that's they would be a 1. And if they're a student in poverty, they get an extra weight of a 0.25. With the idea being that they're more expensive potentially to educate for a variety of reasons. There's also a weight for students who have English language learning needs, and that's 0.2. And then an additional weight for high school students versus middle and elementary school students, which is 0.13 or 1.13. Because high school students are more expensive to educate because they have more services, they have more specific types of classes needing labs and all the sort of extra stuff that high schoolers get in high school. So those are our current weights. There's also a weight for preschool, which is 0.46. That was not part of the study. So that is sort of set aside in this study. So they were really just looking at these other weights. And the study was done by researchers at the University of Vermont and Rutgers University in New Jersey. And the study came to us on Christmas Eve in 2019, and the legislature didn't start actually looking at it until January of 2020. And at that time, I was serving on the Senate Education Committee. We had just started taking testimony and really digging into the report. And then in March of 2020, COVID, the pandemic hit. And it's a really complicated issue to try to do during a pandemic over Zoom. So we had to put it aside and really deal with a pandemic. But this past session, even though we were still on Zoom and it was still a pandemic, we started to take up the issue again. And really, with the idea that are the weights sufficient, and the report actually says that no, the weights are not. They're not accurate anymore. The weights were originally derived pre-Act 60, so before our current funding formula. They are a holdover from our foundation formula, which is the formula we had before Act 60. And they haven't been updated for at least 25 plus years. And it's really difficult to figure out how they came up with the weights in general. You know, were they based on research? Were they based on talking to business managers? Was it just a guess? How did they come up with the weights? And we can't find any evidence of how they came up with the weights. So the study actually recommends 4 different options for weights that are based on running regression analysis of how much the different cost for educating these different types of students are to get to a common outcome. And I want to emphasize that the question the legislature asked was a very narrow question. It was just about the weights. And as you just heard from Elizabeth and Floyd, our formula is way more complicated. There are a lot more factors that go into school funding than just the weights of the students. There's the budgets of the school districts, there's the number of actual students, there's the threshold, there's the, you know, increases in healthcare and salaries. There are just so many factors that go into our formula. This was just looking at a very small thing, which is the weights themselves. So we asked a narrow question and we actually got a pretty narrow answer. The weights are not sufficient. And it was based on trying to educate students to a common outcome, which was simply the test scores for English and math, or English language arts and math. And how much extra money would it take to educate certain types of students to get to common levels of achievement on those standardized tests. And the reason I am emphasizing this, because it has gotten blown up to be much more than that. It's actually a pretty narrow outcome that they're looking at. And so the weights that the authors recommended, the weight for poverty is increased significantly from 0.25 to, depending on which version you pick, to 3.14 or 2.97. That's an enormous increase, 12-fold increase. That is enormous, and it's way different than most other states are using. Hold on, I see you have a question. Is it a clarifying question? Yeah.
2 meetings, or 2 versus before it was worth 1.25. It's
Exactly.
now worth 2.25.
So it's actually worth 3 now, you know, in their recommendations, or 3. So it's like 3 students rather than 1, basically, in the formula. Let me see. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. No, that's okay. So we are looking at the report right now, the study committee, and trying to determine how or if we implement the recommendations in the report. And one thing that I think is really important is that to remember is that in the late 1990s, we did a huge change in our school funding formula as a result of the Brigham decision, which came out of Addison County, by the way, and that went to the Vermont Supreme Court, and they said that our funding formula was not equitable based on tax capacity in individual towns, that it needed to be changed. And the legislature passed Act 60, which created our tax equalization funding formula. And that funding formula actually does a really excellent job of equalizing school funding across towns and school districts based on tax rates and tax capacity. What it doesn't do as well as equalize funding and expenses for students across towns and school districts. So districts that have more students in poverty, or more students who need English language learning, or more high school students, or whatever, they have higher costs for educating those students. And our formula doesn't necessarily do a good job of addressing that issue. So we're trying to figure out, do we try to solve this problem by changing the weights? Or is there another thing that we could do that might be a more effective means of solving this problem? The study has answered this very narrow question by saying the weights need to be increased. increase, but that's not the only option out there. So a task force was created. It includes 4 senators and 4 House members. We started in June. We are authorized 12 meetings to do our work. We've had 7 of those meetings. The first 6 meetings, we spent just getting on the same page and making sure all the legislators understood the current situation, what our current formula is, current law, and then what the recommendations of the study committee were. We heard from a bunch of experts. We heard from the Agency of Education. We've heard from superintendents. We've heard from some business managers, some other experts in ELL, et cetera, to try to get on the same page. And now we're really looking at how and if and what we do make for changes. We have made some preliminary decisions, and we're at the point where we're modeling out our preliminary decisions. I literally, just before I came here, got a spreadsheet, the model of what our preliminary decisions, and I didn't have a chance to look at it and see what happens to your districts. But we will be showing that model at our next meeting, which is next Friday, next week, the 29th of October. And we will basically have what Elizabeth and Floyd have done for your districts for every single district in the state, based on our preliminary decisions. And I just want to emphasize that anytime something happens to one district, any decision that you all make here tonight, or in general, impacts every district in the state, because we have a shared education fund that all districts are funded out of. So that's a really tricky thing when some districts might get additional weights and get additional tax capacity. How they decide to use that additional tax capacity or not would impact everybody. And then the districts that get lower tax capacity, what they decide to do also would impact everybody. The Addison County districts, including both of your districts, as well as the ACSD, are what I consider sort of pretty middle-class districts in terms of every district in the state has students in poverty, but we don't have a huge number of students in poverty compared to other districts in the state. We don't have very many ELL students compared to other districts in the state. So if we were to change the weights pretty drastically, it would reduce your tax capacity pretty drastically. So I can't tell you exactly what we're going to do yet. We haven't taken any formal votes, but it is highly unlikely that we're going to go with the very big weights that have been recommended in the study, mostly because they really distort our tax capacity, the equalization system in our current equalization of tax capacity in our current formula. We also looked at, there are weights that are based on school districts and based on schools. The authors recommend the school level weights, and we are leaning toward the school district level weights, which are more modest, because school districts budget by school districts. Tax rates are calculated by school districts. Everything is done by a school district, not schools. The other thing that's really important to know is when the authors were doing this study and the data they were looking at was pre-Act 46. So when they looked at your districts, they looked at your data before you merged. And things were a lot different then, as you all know, because you're all from different towns and different schools. The individual schools had different ways of budgeting and different ways of doing things. The high schools had different ways. And then when they all merged, everything changed, and you made different budgeting decisions based on the merger, different decisions on where to put resources based on kids' needs in different buildings. And so we're really leaning toward using the district level weights. We're also looking at a completely different, and I don't remember if it was Elizabeth, but we are also looking at a completely different way of dealing with this, which would be more of a expense equalization formula that we would try to work out, and that is extremely preliminary and we haven't modeled it yet. So we are looking at other options besides the weights. The other things that we are doing is, right now, the way that poverty is calculated in a district is based on SNAP eligibility, which is the eligibility for food stamps, which way undercounts the number of students who are living in poverty by a pretty significant amount. So we are looking at using the free and reduced lunch numbers, which give a much more accurate count. And as more and more districts are moving toward universal school lunch, we're also looking at shifting to a universal income form that would be done by every district that would hopefully even get a more accurate count. So that may actually help your districts get credit for more students in poverty. We're also, and this is a thing that probably only Elizabeth and Patrick and Floyd might, some of the weights are additive and some of the weights are multiplicative. And so we literally spent a couple hours just talking about the math. Like, yes, it makes your head explode. So we spent a couple hours just talking about the math. What happens when you multiply by a number? What happens when you add a number? And modeling that out. And it's inconsistent and nobody knows why some of them are additive and some of them are multiplicative. So we're actually leaning toward moving to having them all be additive. So there's consistency. The other thing that the study does recommend is weights for very sparsely populated areas. And they have 3 levels of population density that they look at. So they do give a little bit of a weight for population density for very rural areas. Addison County is not sparsely populated enough to get any of those weights. So it wouldn't benefit the Addison County districts. It is really meant for like the Northeast Kingdom and the very rural areas that have much more expensive districts because they're so far apart and the resources are much more difficult to get. There also is a weight for small schools that are in very sparsely populated areas, meaning schools that are small because there's no way to merge them because they are so, remote. And so they're too far apart to do anything about. And those are also very expensive schools to run. So there's a bit of a weight that would sort of enhance that. So those are new weights, and we would also, if we were to adopt those weights, likely, and all this is preliminary, we would likely eliminate the small schools grants because it would be a double count. We are also considering the possibility of a categorical aid for English language learning because it's such a program that is something that you can really account for. What the is similar to special education. Say this is how many teachers we need, this is how many students. And really what we found is that districts spend all over the map. And there are some districts that are spending quite a bit per pupil and some that are spending almost nothing per pupil. And we really want to make sure that our districts across our state are being accountable to the students who have English language learning needs and really budgeting for them and then have state aid to help them support that budget. So I think that actually would benefit your district, even though you don't have that many ELL students. And one of the things that I was really looking at is the districts that have very few ELL students, even if you do weight them, the tax capacity you get for the weights is not sufficient to support the program. So this would be a minimum grant and then built on top of that to make sure that districts had sufficient resources to hire teachers to teach ELL. So we are meeting again next week. And part of that meeting is a public hearing. And I really encourage anybody who wants to come and testify. Sheila's going to be there, so Patrick, if you would like to testify. I know that John Straub, the chair of the Addison Northwest District, is planning on testifying. So if Representative Sharp has come a couple times. So if anybody else wants to come, or maybe just once, I can't remember. If anyone else wants to come, I really encourage you to come and talk about what you foresee the impact on your district is based on what you know and what you've heard from me tonight. But we've heard from a lot of districts that would be potential beneficiaries of a change in the weights. And we'd really like to hear from the full spectrum of districts that would be impacted positively, negatively, and how it might impact not just your budgeting, not just whether you hit the threshold, but how it might actually impact the education of your students. So if anybody wants to testify, let me know. There's a public hearing, you get 3 minutes, you can come via Zoom. And we are hoping to have a report that is approved by all 8 of us, have a bipartisan, bicameral report, and then we would introduce a bill with our recommendations that would need to go through the full legislative process, just like any bill. So this is just really, I don't know, maybe it's the 4th or 5th step, but there's still a lot more steps to go. And we're still working out the details, and I'm happy to answer questions. I probably talked longer than you gave me, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Troy.
Hi, Troy.
It sounds like this is all about the funding side from the money that comes in. This is not, there's no discussion about where the money comes from. So this is all still assuming it stays on property tax.
Oh, so thank you for that question. So yes, I mean, what this is about is actually tax capacity. Your equalized pupils is what's determined the amount of tax capacity you have in your district, what your tax rate is going to be and how much money you can raise through your tax base, and then how much you get from the education fund. It's not about the spending side, it's really about the tax capacity side. So even if the districts do get more tax capacity, there's no guarantee that they'll spend it on the students. And even if you get less tax capacity, there's no guarantee that you'll cut your budget. They're all, you know, all of it still remains local decisions, basically.
But I guess
to your question, yes. So we are looking also at the possibility, and this is very preliminary, and we haven't seen any of the modeling yet because we're just getting the data from the tax department. We are looking at the possibility of shifting education funding from property tax to income tax and having a local income tax or some type of income tax. And so more than 2/3 of Vermonters already pay for education based on income. You know that from the budget you've seen, like there's the property tax rate and then there's the income rate. And it depends on your level of income. So there are proposals. There was a tax structure commission that came out with a report this past February. They recommended moving toward some sort of income tax or expanding the income eligibility for paying for education based on income rather than property. So that would be a huge shift, and it would move things off this property tax base kind of model that we have right now. I don't know that we're going to have the runway to be able to make full-fledged recommendations within our committee or our task force, but I think we're going to start moving in that direction so that the legislature takes it up, assuming that the modeling does what we think it might. And that would really change the conversation drastically. Hopefully in a good way, I think, hopefully. Yeah.
This is a random question, but often when it's come up about what we vote on, who initiates the change of why are towns or districts voting on their school budgets anyway? Why isn't, or like, can the town say, we don't want to do this anymore? Or does the state say, you don't have to vote on this anymore? Like if you're over, in some states, like if you're over a certain percentage, that's when your districts vote on it, but otherwise they don't vote on it. It's just a random thing.
Yeah,
we have to like have everybody approve our budgets, and we don't approve the state budget, right? Or the federal budget.
So it is Vermont tradition and part of our culture and 7 generations or whatever you want to say of Vermonters voting on school budgets. It is just the local control of local towns and local school districts determining their school budget and then voting to approve or not approve their budget is really part of the sort of culture of Vermont. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's the way it is. It would be, I think, a pretty difficult thing to change to tell local towns that they no longer get to vote on their budgets. That hasn't come up in the context of this study. We have talked a lot about like, what is the responsibility of local and what is this responsibility of the state? And how do we keep the balance of local control and state oversight? Constitutionally, the state is actually the one that is supposed to guarantee that. We have one of the few state constitutions that guarantees the right to an education for all students. And we, the state, are the sort of protectors of that, so to speak, in concert with the locals, but it's really on us. So we really have to figure out what is that right balance where we want you to do your important work at the local level, and I've done it, so I respect it. But also, how do we ensure across the state that we have equitable and fair education for all students, not just students in Bristol and New Haven and Canton and whatever, all of your towns, but everywhere. And that's the balance. And I don't know if you all saw the Addison Independent article about this issue. If you haven't, I encourage you to read it. It's really a balance I'm trying to strike right now as the Addison County Senator that represents towns that may not benefit from this, but also really trying to figure out what's best for students across the state. And how do we ensure equity and fairness for all students? And how do I do that where I represent all of you? And I hear these reports. So I'm in a tough place, and I hope you'll bear with me and be patient and understanding, but I also really want to hear your ideas. We have suspended the threshold for 2 years, and that the threshold is part of our conversations. Once we see the model and we see the impact, we're going to talk about ways to mitigate that impact. So phasing things in, whether or not the threshold needs to be changed or eliminated or completely rethought, whether there's a floor or a maintenance of effort, saying that districts have to spend at least this much on certain things. And the hold harmless provisions. So we're looking at a lot of things that hopefully will mitigate the impact for districts that might have a big increase or a big decrease in either way, so that it's not just a bam in 1 year. So yeah.
It's a little frustrating to hear that all of these things won't actually affect us, because you've seen our projections. We're going to have some issues regardless of whether we merge or not. You spoke about having certain, like a ladder for very rural districts. And I think it's interesting because despite the fact that we're not very rural, we don't have the same opportunities of efficiencies of like Burlington or South Burlington or Essex. So to not give us anything unless we're below the super certain level and allow them to have efficiencies, and then also get help with their EL, I'm gonna not know that. Yes. It feels like, I know this is super complicated, but yeah, that's.
Yeah, no, I understand, it's frustrating. And there are 3 levels of population density that are proposed in the report. So under 36 people per square mile, under 55 people per square mile, and under 100 people per square mile. So there is a population density ladder already in the report, and that is based on school district. That
the fact we have Lincoln, but also Bristol, means that even though we have to spend more on transportation for some of our lower density towns, because we even out, it doesn't help us.
Well, transportation is actually taken out of the calculations because there's already a categorical aid that provides funding for school districts for transportation. So when they were doing their analysis, they actually removed transportation from their calculations. Okay. So you do get money for your transportation costs. It's about a 50% reimbursement. And there are some districts that I'm gonna guess yours is not one of them, but they get extraordinary transportation costs, and you don't get it, yeah. So those are mostly for like.
We'd be happy to receive.
Yeah, those are mostly for the Northeast Kingdom that has like super long transportation, but you do get aid for transportation already. But yes, I hear you. There's this sort of, Addison County is stuck in the middle in a lot of ways in terms of the where they fall. It also means and I know this doesn't feel like this right now, but it also means that the impact on you is not as great as the impact on other districts. There are some districts that will see a much, much, much bigger impact if we were to implement the full study recommendations, which we already have decided we're not. We're just trying to figure out what we're doing. So I'm super conscientious of this, impact and trying to figure out how do we make it okay. And I know the districts that are in declining enrollment are sort of in a double bind if we change the equalization factors and it makes your declining enrollment decline even more, which is what would be projected. So we're trying to figure that out. Yeah, but I hear you. Yeah.
So when the wage study came out, there was a lot of buzz about it being really good and thorough, and should be, somebody even go so far to say it should be implemented 100% without any monkey. And your discussion tonight, you're talking about some of the weights being just too much, and it should be less than that. I would be interested in hearing the understanding of how they developed those weights at the levels they did through the study compared to how your working committee has determined them to be too much of a jump. I mean, reality might be that that's a proper jump as opposed to too much, I guess.
Yep. So I think the study is a very good analysis, and it's a type of analysis that we haven't had the capacity to do in the past. And I think the overall findings, which is that many school districts don't have sufficient resources to educate students in poverty in particular, but also ELL students or very rural districts. They're all more expensive to do, and our current system, our current formula doesn't take that into account. And that's the clear finding of the study, and I don't debate that at all. I mean, I think that is really true, and so we're trying to figure out how do we do that. But they calculate the weights by looking at school district data, school data, and then regional data, and comparing across schools, school districts, and region. And the region is the New England region, excluding the Boston metropolitan area, because that's obviously an outlier, right? And they look at the cost for the differences for costs in each of those three levels for educating these different types of kids to reach common outcomes. And those outcomes are based on test scores. And they use data from 2010 to 2017 in order to calculate the recalculation of their weights. And I don't doubt that the regression analysis is accurate. It's based on, a statistical regression analysis, and I don't doubt that it's accurate. But what it doesn't take into account, I think, is the different ways that school districts have changed their organization since that study was done. So all of the mergers across the state are not taken into account, and the differences for how districts budget. What's also not taken into account is all the other factors for outcomes for students. In most cases, if we were sitting here talking about student outcomes and only focusing on test scores, all of us around this table would, I think, feel uncomfortable with that, right? And this, I don't want to assume, but I'm going to guess that most of us would feel uncomfortable with just looking at test scores as outcomes. And this is what the study mostly does, is look at outcomes based on test scores. So if you look at a broader function of outcomes, how would this change? And then they're just, the way we measure poverty, changing from SNAP to free and reduced lunch actually has a significant impact on the weights. Changing from multiplicative to additive also has a significant impact. So one of the things the report says is if you make changes and also over time, you should recalculate the weights. And they recommend that the weights be calculated every 5 years. Well, by the time we implement this study, the weights will already be older than 5 years, no matter what weights we pick. So we're sort of it's a catch-22, like when do you recalculate them? So we're actually trying to recalculate them now to see if we can figure out what the differences might be. So it's trying to, like, you know, fly a plane while we're building it kind of thing. So I think the study is excellent. I think the findings are excellent. It's really the details, and when you start doing the math, you realize that there are all these things that are complicating the overall findings of the report. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that clarifies.
Yeah.
So I guess a comment would be test scores. Understand that oftentimes all the other subtleties overcompensate for the inability to have test scores uniform, if you will, for the outcome of test scores. I mean, we get right down to it, basically is the ability to read, the ability to do math. The unfortunate thing with all that is, you know, the 20s, 30s, something people that are moving around are internet savvy, and the first thing they do if they decide to relocate, they start looking at things online. And if you go to Zillow, they're just like test scores, test scores, test scores. And it gives, even though there may be these subtleties you talk about, it gives a wrong impression for those people initially to figure out where they want to relocate to. So test scores really are very important from that point of view. Unfortunately, this area struggles with that compared to Chittenden County. I mean, it's not the only reason people move to Chittenden County, but this area struggles with that. And to me, it's important to not make light of the test score
Absolutely.
issue.
I mean, test scores are, first of all, they're easy data to acquire and use in any kind of analysis, and they're easy for people to understand. They're also the official thing. We require tests, and so we want students to do well on them. So I'm not saying that they're not a valid thing to be using as a measure of outcomes. But it's also a very narrow measure compared to the full spectrum. They did say they considered using graduation rates, but for some reason that didn't work in their analysis. And so to do a regression analysis, you have to have like easy data, like data that's like math data, you know, mathematical, like numbers. And having the sort of bigger picture data is much more difficult to include in a regression analysis. So you're right, we shouldn't discount them. They're super important. But I think there are other factors we need to consider as well. Is there another question? So I am happy to come back after we have more results and talk to you again about what we're seeing in the results. I know that as soon as we make them public, all the superintendents in the state and business managers in the state, I would assume that you're all going to be scrolling down. Addison County is first because we're A. I always love it when I see the spreadsheet. I'm like, boom, boom, boom. So please reach out to me, Floyd, if you want to testify, Elizabeth, you know, whatever, and talk to me about them once they're public. We're trying really hard, as you business managers know, once data is out there, it is out there. So we want to make sure that it's accurate and that our math is right and that everything, the I's are dotted and T's are crossed before it's out there. But I'm happy to come back, and please let me know if you want to testify, or you can watch us on live stream or on recording also. So we're pretty accessible, and I'm easy to find, but I'm happy to give you you can find my email and phone number online pretty easily. So please reach out if you have questions. Yeah.
I would just like to thank you for being so transparent and very, very clear. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very,
You're
very
welcome.
helpful.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for your work, and I'm happy to answer more questions whenever. So, but I'm going to let you get back to your work, and I'm going to go home and eat dinner. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Next on the agenda is a break. I would like to forego that because we're running a little behind. So if you want to stand up and stretch, feel free, or whatever you need to do, feel free to do that. But I would like to move forward to the financial considerations for a union school district option.
I'm gonna move for expedite this and suggest that we come back to it in December because it's really critical that we discuss community meetings, which and do that planning, which is coming up. So what I'm passing around is the one pager that you asked for last time. Recall that earlier this evening, we modeled tax rate projections for the status quo on that last page in the line graph, which is the two circles, if you think about our governance models. And we looked at tax rate projections for a union district, the one circle. This sheet gives you an overview of the governance and cost considerations for a union school. That would be the third option with multiple circles inside of a larger supervisory union. I'd like to ask that you look it over between now and the next meeting, and then we can discuss further and I can answer any questions. I want to be really clear that by December, we need to be at a point where we can choose a pathway to draft articles and model going forward. But I didn't want to close any pathways for you prematurely. So just ask that you read this, be prepared to discuss further in December. And for tonight, let's get ready for community engagement. So what I have for community engagement is a document that's coming around that provides an overview of how a community engagement meeting could go and some resources to kind of represent what role committee members might have and the types of supports that we can provide for you. At the top of the page is a section that's called planning considerations. I want to let you know that superintendents and I met and co-chairs and I have discussed the process. And the recommendation is that because we want tremendous community engagement and participation, that the best way to do this is likely virtual. A, because we've had good virtual participation in the region throughout the pandemic, and B, COVID rates continue to be pretty darn high on a statewide basis, and it's just not the time to bring large groups together, as nice as it would be to do that. So if anybody disagrees with that, now's the time to say so. Otherwise, we'll go ahead with a virtual plan. Okay, sounds like there's no disagreement. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we talked briefly last time about a question and answer type format for employees. Employees will likely have questions that might be different than the larger community. And superintendents and I have talked about processes for that. And we are hoping to possibly recruit Justin, Stephanie, and Becca to help us with that a little after November. But to the extent that it's helpful to let employees know that we're working on a plan for those kinds of questions and wonders and worries and hopes. We've got that in the planning stage and we'll get to that. Yeah.
Who's developing the questions? Like, how will those questions be developed and focused? And I feel like that could get off the rails pretty quickly.
For employees?
Yeah.
The employees? We would, one of the strategies would be that Justin, Stephanie, and Becca would be the collectors of questions from employees. They'd synthesize them and then they would ask them.
Oh, so we're collecting
anonymous.
questions, we're not asking questions.
For that, for the Q&A, yes.
Okay.
okay? Because the needs of employees are really different. Will I have a job? What's the process for deciding which school I work in? Those kinds of things are quite different than what we're looking at for our community forum. Okay. The other thing that's not on the sheet that I wanted to mention is this doesn't have to be a regular meeting that's called to order. We can do that if you're more comfortable with that and if that's what your community expectation is, but we could also approach it just like an informational meeting. You are not going to be discussing information or making decisions. You'll be listening to the community, taking legislative testimony, almost like Senator Hardy's team is doing. So that could make the meeting process a little easier, but I defer to you on your preference on that.
You're looking for feedback?
Yep.
So I think we should take testimony. We should make an effort to give everybody 3 minutes or some way of encouraging people to express what they're thinking.
Perfect. And we've got a process where we can do that.
So would that make it a public meeting or not?
It doesn't have to be. The structure we're talking about is breaking people out into circles virtually so that everyone has a voice, an opportunity to share their voice and be heard, and then committee members would bring that back and we'd synthesize it. So we'll come back to that, but let me talk to you about a structure. Yes?
I'm sorry to probably let before, but just in terms of the virtual format, I mean, I do worry a little bit that it would exclude people who don't have, good broadband and that kind of thing. So is there, I mean, I guess at least when we publicize it, we should maybe encourage, if you can't, Zoom into this, please come to one of our regular scheduled meetings and bring your ideas to us there or something.
Let me talk through the process and you tell me if the options that we have will meet that need or if we need something else. Okay? So in terms of logistics, Sheila is willing to be what I call the producer and manage the Zoom hosting, including assigning people to groups for circles. The process should include pre-registration. Ideally, individuals can sign up for one or both, either one or both sessions, and the registration would need to include their email information so that we can follow up with them. And Sheila's comfortable and Patrick is comfortable helping us with that process. We definitely would need to do some advertisement and recruiting over the next couple of weeks, hopefully with the support of our Front Porch Forum designees. I can include it in tonight's brief so that you can share, everyone can share it. And superintendents are willing to share via school announcements and websites. And I think we want to specifically target students. And this is the time, one of the times when it would be great to reach out to student leadership to say, make sure students join too. That's a question. Yeah.
Would that be like the robocall that goes out to everybody, like a snow day?
It could be even a tool that we have access to.
It feels like we would want, like you get in every parent's voicemail with that, which is more effective than their email, I believe.
And high school kids then.
And high school, yeah. Well, that's gonna have to be Front Porch Forum or the newspaper.
Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook. Old people use Facebook. That's what the kids tell me.
Website, we have that website.
School websites, yeah. Maybe the newspaper? I don't know what our time frame is, but.
Well, we have been summer, so we could definitely.
Yeah, ask the Addison,
November.
ask the Addison Independent to put a little,
But we could do a box ad.
what's that?
We can do a box ad.
Sure.
Based on your decisions tonight, I am willing to create a survey for you that we can offer to folks after they've participated, and we can make it available to people who couldn't attend either one of the sessions. So my hope is that will catch some of the people who have some connectivity, but not necessarily Zoom level broadband, potentially. And we look to those same pathways for sharing the survey. So the way the event could go is it could begin with a welcome by the co-chairs, which I would help you with, that just introduces the committee, gives an overview of the agenda, includes a brief overview of the charge and what the committee's accomplished so far. Really emphasizing that our goal is to work through a transparent process, and that we are planning to use the feedback from community members and stakeholders to guide decision-making in the future. And again, that will follow with that online survey for feedback. Participants didn't get to share, so nobody will leave the session not feeling like they didn't have a chance to get all of their ideas out. There's that follow-up opportunity and an opportunity for people who didn't get to share. We could try and do a virtual getting to know you activity. That would be hard with large turnout when you can't get everybody on the screen. But if we were able to meet in person, we'd want to do that. I could use your feedback as to whether or not we want to try that. And if so, if there's somebody willing to facilitate that. That also could happen in small groups, in breakout groups, if preferred. And then, still in a large group, would love it if someone would introduce the circle protocol, give that little intro to restorative circles, emphasize the key differences between a true restorative circle in our process and a true restorative circle. It's really what happens in the circle stays in the circle. In our restorative circles, the hope is to assign a note taker and a circle facilitator to each group. And it's important for folks to know that committee members will be filling some of those roles and will be recording the ideas shared. You won't be recording word for word or attributing ideas to anyone in particular, but for people to know that you're getting the gist of what they're saying and keeping the who shared what confidential. And then our producer can break us into groups. There is a little outline of what a circle process would look like. That we'll get to in just a second. So we'll go through a circle process. And then typically there's a closing. We could do that in circles, or we could have everybody come back to the whole group. If there's a closing, groups could share one highlight from their circle, or you could just, in your circles, thank people for their participation, encourage them to join the second session at the end of the first session, remind them about the online survey opportunity that will be coming to them via email, remind them again about the use of their feedback, and thank them for their open, honest sharing from the heart.
Yeah. In our experience, when I was on the school board and we went separated into different groups, it was, some people were waiting forever to come back as a whole group, and others were, having really important discussions in the small groups. So I don't know if, I mean, is there an alternative if we didn't come back as a whole group? Could we kind of recap and do what you're saying at the end, share one thing at the start of session 2? Or a different time, or not session 2, a different time? Or use it in a summary?
Yeah, we would use it in a summary.
Okay.
I'm thinking that you will work together to synthesize at the meeting in December, so the highlights will come out and be
Okay.
shared publicly. So, and for that, that's the reason that closing in your smaller groups can be preferred over the large group. If you're ready to close, you can close.
Right,
And if
right.
you need to keep talking, you can keep talking.
The other side of that is it can be hard to get out, so, and not that you don't want to hear from people, but it might, sometimes it's nice to know this is how long we have to talk about this.
True.
And that it has like a countdown that says, okay, your breakout rooms are about to close, and so it sends you back to the main group. And that can be kind of effective to keeping the thing moving, not to go. I do want to hear from everybody too, so I get that, I think. And I would not do, unless at the beginning, as a whole group, there was a thing that was like, you could punch a number, like, about stuff you have in common, like, you know, I'm a parent, or I'm a whatever, or I had kids in the school system, or I grew up in Addison County, or that kind of thing. That's just like a punch-in code. Otherwise, I don't think going around the circle in a large group is a good idea. Mics are terrible.
Yeah. All right. But potentially in the breakout.
In the small groups, in the breakout groups, I think it'd be effective.
Okay.
If they're small enough.
I noticed like in the schedule of the program, it's got like 50 minutes for circles. I guess I'm wondering, how large do you envision these circles being? That actually seems like a lot of time to me. I think an ideal size for the circle would be like 10 or under people, and they're just to manage it in a breakout room.
Yeah.
50 minutes gives we could go 3-4 rounds.
Right.
I think easily in that amount of time, that seems like plenty of time.
Well, if you have 5 circle questions, just 5.
Yeah.
10 people in the circle plus a facilitator and the note taker who are not speaking, except to give the prompts. That means everybody has 1 minute for each prompt. So, yeah. And on the last page.
We got 15 minutes in TA in the morning. I got 11 kids in my advisory. We get it done.
Yeah.
Can I jump on that real quick?
Yeah.
Like Martha was saying, if we just left from breakout groups, really no problem with that. The group takes 15 minutes. In theory, at the end of the event, they would get cut loose from there, right? And
yes.
Also based on that same event Martha was talking about, I don't think filling that time is going to be challenging at all. You'll have a harder time writing it in to have 15 minutes.
Well, and what we can do is we can do both. We can call people back. You know, we can, if you're done, go, because you'll have done the closing, and we can still call people back and say, thank you. We understand you still have more to share. Here's the opportunity. So we can say it twice. So we can kind of manage the end of it.
I have a question. Will there be a way to try and balance out, like, I would assume we would want a little bit of balance between the 2 districts in each circle. Like, is that something we could do, or is it going to be luck of the draw who's in there?
We would, to a large degree, we're hoping that people pre-register and we get a little bit of information about who they are so that your producer can assign people to groups in advance, because we absolutely want a mix of stakeholders in every circle, because this is not only about sharing what's in your heart, but hearing what's in other people's hearts, and that's where the power of the dialogue comes from. So.
There's somebody that's asking to make a comment.
We have public comment coming up.
So if you could look at the both of page 2 and page 3 is a script for a facilitator that I offer to let you know that there's a tremendous amount of support if you're asked to facilitate, okay? And I know every one of you can do that. Sheila will assign facilitators and note takers, and depending on registration numbers, we may pull in some teachers as well to assist. On the very back page, last time, you asked for more of a menu of questions, and so I've provided that, and what I'm hoping to do is to narrow those down and also have a chunk of additional questions if time allows. So you do as much as you can and you overplan. And if you don't need it, it's not a problem. But if you do have the opportunity to go forward, you have the opportunity to go further and forward. So I suggest a couple of quick questions for warming up, asking folks to share their name and what brought them to the event. And as a second warm-up question, a quick question about a positive learning experience in their past and what made it positive. That's a really good one to bring people into the thinking about education and learning and what makes it great. And then I listed 3 through 14, 11 other questions. Some of them were the ones that you used in your circles, and some of them are a little different. And I would love your help picking a maximum of 4 to 5 that ought to be in the top, in the questions, and then I can move the others to possible questions. The order of the question matters, and type of question matters too. You want things really open-ended and topics that people can talk from their personal experience and their personal perspective from. Yep, I do. Yes,
Yeah,
right now, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Supposed to give you my number?
Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna merge 5 and 6.
4, 7, 9, 11, 12.
So we have a proposal for 4, 7, 9, 11, 12. Anybody want to argue for something different?
5. I think there might be fears that things will change, and I would like to see that we honor things that people are proud of in their school system.
And they would like to see continue.
Yeah,
Trying
which
to
I feel like.
I like that one, I would agree with that.
I'm not sure about asking 9, too, just because I think you get so many different takes on that. I don't know what we do with that info.
Your conversations about that were the most informative to me.
Oh, really?
As an outsider. Yeah.
I agree. I think that with some of the towns in particular, people hearing different opinions, broad opinions, would be very powerful.
I don't like the way it's worded.
Which one?
Number 9,
Number 9.
because that to me just drives you to a place that
I
mean,
agree with the wording, it needs to be reworded,
Yeah,
but I do
that's-
think that something needs to be, we need to talk about what does local mean,
yeah.
right? Because I do think we need to define what is local, because I think that gets to the heart of what holds people back from wanting to merge, is that local control. And so if we can have people think about in their mind what is local and hear what other people say, but there's something wrong with the wording there. That kind of limits.
What does local mean?
I think as simple as that, what does local mean?
For education or just?
Or just in general, and I think that might even open it up, like what does local, word local mean? Because I think it just opens it up, because we all know what we're getting at.
because we're sitting here talking about merging. And we're all sitting here talking about schools. We know that we're hinting at it, right? It's the elephant in that room. So but I do think we need to talk about local and local control, but I think, yeah, I don't like the wording of that.
Okay. Got it. What does local, can we merge 5 and 11?
5, 6, and 11.
6 and 5 are the same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
5 and
can.
6 are kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Can I merge them and start with a,
Yeah, I do think number 7 has its place too, like what needs to be improved. It kind of is that contrast and balance to what we really like and what it needs to be improved.
Yeah, definitely.
okay, so right now I have 4, a merger of 5, 6, and 11. What do we like that we want to have, or are proud of that we want to have continue? 7, 9 reworded. What does local mean? 4. I did 4. 1, 2, 3. And number 5 would be 12. The 5th one would be 12.
Yeah, so I would like to argue for, maybe instead of 12, something worded more like 13 or 14, because I think they're all getting at the same thing. And I think it's important to ask, like, what would you see as success, right? Like, what is the evidence that you would take as a successful merger or a positive outcome or something along those lines?
Well, I've got Dave who had his hand up and.
I would vote for 14 because it gets at how the shift is run.
We don't have name tags tonight, so
So I was just gonna comment that I would readily substitute 13 for 12.
Got it.
And I think the important thing there is an equitable education. I think all too often we don't consider the broad base of what we're trying to provide.
13 is substituted for 12. I heard 2 or 3 speak to that. So then I'll have 14.
So I like the notion of what do you see as success? In the end, we want people to vote for our recommendation. And I think one of the things that school boards in general forget is the politics of what we're accomplishing or not accomplishing. Because in the end, voters decide the budget, the voters decide whether it's going to be a merger. So the notion of asking what does success look like might be helpful in terms of us figuring out what might be might get a successful vote.
So what I can do is polish the questions and add what is now 14 and 8. And you would know that in your circles, you probably wouldn't get to all of them, but those would get more feedback from the survey process at the end.
If you're gonna include 4, I kind of want to reword that a little bit.
Okay.
Say something like, if there's a successful merger of the districts, what do you see as a successful outcome? Because I don't know that the respondents could be able to say what outcomes might be success, might result from a successful merger. They won't know. But rather, if there is a merger, what would you see? I mean, what would you expect to be? How would you evaluate its success? How would you define success?
If you rephrase it as, what are your hopes?
Yeah, something like that.
No, I was just gonna, I think you added in 8,
think it's important to have something, in terms of cost concerns, taxpayer concerns. I agree with what it, but. So it's 8:30, I can polish this from your feedback. I just want to go back and quickly, we have a plan for finishing. We're not going to do getting to know you. Is there someone who feels comfortable introducing the circle protocol? Or would you like me to do that? I don't, I want this to be yours. All right, I'll do it. You would? Yeah. Erica. Perfect.
Is it possible, is this like our next meeting is gonna be
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Is it possible for us to arrive a little earlier so we have a little, or like our ducks in a row, some of us? I would feel more confident personally. No?
So I will give you preparatory materials probably before the end of this week.
Okay.
Right? Because that's what I would want.
Right.
Remember that we have to wait for registration for Sheila to assign people, and then we'll have the last minute people to deal with. If you have a preference as to facilitation or note-taking, can you email me that, please? And we can take that into consideration. You, because we'll have a core hub here, but because you're going to be on your computers facilitating, you can't be all in the same room, right? Because we'll have crazy echoes. So it's an evening where your participation could be from home, or we'll need to spread out in the school, but I can be on site to provide moral support and backup.
Erica, did you have something?
I was trying to ask that same thing. I guess my question is there something, are we coming back together at the end to bring the salient points together, or is that waiting till the next meeting?
That's waiting till the first meeting in December.
Okay.
You can end if your group's done, or we will call you back at 8:30 to say, thanks so much.
So, that all sounds awesome. We just did remote parent conferences, and things work and don't work sometimes, tech-wise. So I just would want to make sure that everybody is in a place or space where they know they're going to get excellent bandwidth, because it'd be really embarrassing for us not to have our tech working. If somebody else's doesn't work and they pop in and out, fine, but that can't be the case for us. So I just want to throw that out there.
Or Sheila, do you have any recommendations for that?
Next one's in for Jen.
So just clarifying, you're talking about November 1st, not November 16th, right?
Right, that's the.
And I have only done this when everyone is remote, so not when there's a group of individuals trying to Zoom. In fact, that's harder in a lot of ways, right? Because it's kind of like the setup we have now where, you're all there together, but in some ways, but I agree, everyone needs to have good bandwidth and good, connectivity to make this work well.
Have you email me if you have a preference around facilitation or note-taking. And if you have a worry about bandwidth and would like a space at school.
Are we at Virgins?
We're at Virgins for the first one. Let me know and I'll work with Patrick and Sheila to find you a spot where we know you'll have bandwidth, and somebody in addition to me, perhaps tech support, can be on site for emergency backup, because I can't help with that.
So, do I understand this correctly, that we're going to have this public input before we get the financial implications of creating a supervisory union in the third model that we looked at in your initial proposal?
You have the report in hand and we'll be able to discuss that in December.
This report here?
Yep.
this doesn't have the financials.
That's right. We talked about a report that summarizes the considerations and the decisions that have to be made in order to generate financials.
Are you gonna have enough of us to have us be a facilitator and a note taker? You think?
Sheila and Patrick talked about recruiting some teachers to assist if we need them.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, my only concern is that date is quickly approaching and it just doesn't give people a lot of time to even register. So I'd almost suggest we do this on November 16th instead of November 1st, just to have more time to advertise it and get people to, you know, but I'm wide open, but it's just something to think about. It just doesn't give us very much time to, you know, get people to sign up and know how many facilitators that we might need. If we had a really good turnout, you know, we're essentially asking people to be available a week after next, and that's a pretty quick turnaround time too.
My other thought is if we have to ask teachers to help facilitate, that's the week of parent-teacher conferences, since we're already out those evenings that week, Sheila, if you ask for Gen teachers. So we're out on Thursday and Friday, and you're not going to get anyone help. So I'm just throwing that out there too. At this point in the school year, I'm sorry. I will be there. I will be the only one. Becca, are you talking about the first week in November? Yes. I'm concerned about sports playoffs.
Well, yeah, I was about to say that. It goes by Sheila soccer team, and the semifinal will either be on the 1st or the 2nd, and we wouldn't know until after we win the quarterfinal, find out who our opponent is, and the ADs talk to each other. So.
Well, the 16th.
But the 16th, it's all done.
That only gives us 2 weeks to get information out, get people signed up, and get organized. The 16th might be a much better.
You can do just one, and on the 16th, I can keep you busy on November 1st for sure. Okay.
Yeah. I like that.
Do we have to make a motion for that, or no, that's just a decision?
In the meantime, I'll still give you preparatory materials to draft and add. Practice. Yep, we'll get everything going. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel better about that.
Can I ask a question quickly about this document?
Yes.
Is this something that we would expect people in our circles to have seen, or that we would share with them, or is this is just for us?
Yeah, this is for you. You will not have to explain anything. Information will be explained by the co-chairs in advance, and your role will be facilitating and listening, asking the questions and listening, and taking notes. But we can now discuss this on November 1st.
Okay, great.
Okay. Moving on, the communication key points of this evening's meeting. Troy.
Some really good information from both the district financial teams and Ruth Hardy from the state about some financial forecasting and problem solving around that may or may not be all the good news we want.
Both reads, waiting.
Anybody else? Anything else?
I think it's important we talk about the upcoming community engagement activity or session.
Yeah.
I'd just like to reiterate that it's important to communicate with your legislators. Most all of the legislators, regardless of what party they're from, really want to do what they think is best for the state, and they want listen to their constituents. They actually want that kind of input and feedback, and so people should do that. So I encourage you all to do that with your legislators, not just about schools, but.
I'd like to tag on to Kevin's point about our discussion about the community engagement, about how we feel it's really important, and we're going to try and provide an opportunity for everyone who wants to have some voice.
Yes.
It was good to hear from Senator Hardy that, well, it's okay to try to tweak the existing financial model to adjust for inequalities around the state. There is some strategic thinking looking ahead to possibly change the whole financial model from property-based to income-based.
I don't know that I would include that. I think that's probably too much detail, given that it's not really relevant yet, since it's so undecided.
I think the point is that the whole structure is being looked at carefully, from the weighting threshold to the,
Tax base.
the tax base. So I think, that's the point that needs to be conveyed.
The broad-based discussion, including merger studies and other initiatives.
Waiting study.
Yeah, waiting, I'm sorry.
Thank you. In other words, people are thinking about it a lot.
I think Brad's point is well taken. Although the study was very narrow, as she pointed out, the charge to the task force was extremely broad. And these other considerations are part of what they're thinking.
And I think we need to mention Elizabeth and Floyd's presentation also.
Yeah.
I think that was mentioned. Yeah. Anything else to add? Okay, public comment. We have one person with public comment. And we are going to give them the opportunity right now.
Is this the opportunity for public comment?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for hearing my comments. My name is Herb Olson. I live on Island Road in Starksboro. I am a member of the Starksboro Save Our Schools Committee, shortened to Starksboro SOS. Pretty catchy, huh? So I want to say I respect the work that you're doing. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to save costs here in terms of dealing with the two districts. Whether that involves a merger or something other than a merger is I think a totally different question, but that's not really the focus of my comment here. The focus of my comment has to do with Starksboro being adamantly opposed to the superintendent of the Mount Abe district's proposal to close Robinson School. That's the elementary school in our town, without a town vote. We feel that's required by the current Articles of Association. And I think a lot of people just really don't want to close the school, but the numbers are huge in terms of don't close it without a vote. Promise is a promise. Meanwhile, the merger study committee is working here, and both the statute and the charge is pointing to a merger. Now, I'm sure there are members of your committee who have various opinions about that, whether that should be done. But, just from our perspective of trying to keep our school open, we need to think about the consequences of merger because that's what's on the table right now. And if new articles are adopted in a merged district, the question is, what's going to happen to the current Mount Abe District Articles of Agreement that guarantee a right to vote by each town before their school is closed. This has been going on for over a year now, and there are lots of people that seem to want to close our school. And we don't want that to happen. So I'm looking at your work plan. And the original work plan, of course, called for a town meeting day vote, this coming March. Then you changed that, which was a welcome relief from our perspective to have, but it still calls for draft articles to be submitted to the Agency of Education sometime in March, or maybe it's February, I can't entirely tell. And then putting them to the state board by May or June. And again, this is in the context of a work plan that on its face anyway, is pointing towards a merger where, the articles of agreement of the new district could change. And so Robinson, Starksboro is facing, pretty existential threat. You should know that Starksboro is adamantly opposed to closing our school for a host of reasons without a vote. Whether it's by the Mount Abe board or by in a merged district. And again, I don't know I don't know the views of the members here of this committee. I'm just looking at the work plan, and it's telling me that that's kind of where things are pointed. We are bound and determined not to allow that, closure to happen. We're pretty passionate, frankly, not to puff us up a little bit, but we're pretty skilled in public affairs and pretty well organized. And we understand that the committee needs to do what it needs to do. That's you need to develop your own process and work things out. And we in Starksboro, we'll continue to do what we need to do, right? So what the quest, I think, is for the Merger Study Committee to take a look at its work plan and figure out a way to have a discussion and some sort of decision worked into that work plan that talks about this issue. In other words, whether, at least in the Mount Abe towns, which have these articles, whether a town's gonna keep the right to vote to maintain its school, whether or not to maintain a school. I mean, if there's a good argument to close the school, that's fine. But the way it's been presented to us has been, we'll find some way to get around that. So that's my request. I wanted to make sure you knew that we were here. We had a particular point of, we have a particular point of view. We're pretty adamant about it. And we hope that the committee will be able to work this issue into their work plan so that there can be a discussion and decision about it, frankly, sooner rather than later. So again, I appreciate your work. You're working hard. Thank you for your work. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other public comment? Having no further comment, looking for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Troy?
I second it.
Becca seconds it. There's a motion on the floor to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Meeting, any abstentions? Meeting